Hey everybody, this is Ian Taylor. He's the bass player for Object Heavy up here in Northern California in Bigfoot County. Ian, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, man. So what have you been up to lately?
Pandemic has put a lot of free time on everybody's hands. For most of the last year, I haven't been up to a whole lot of note other than practicing, but Object Heavy is starting to get our feet wet again. And we've got a gig coming up on Saturday here in town. And then we've got a few dates planned over the summer out of town, mostly just Pacific Northwest stuff, some outdoor low cap festivals that I'm really hoping stay an option as long as the COVID numbers stay good. So we've been doing a lot of practicing with the band, gearing up to release an album that we had recorded pre-pandemic. And we've just been sitting on waiting for the opportunity to put it out and tour on it, and a lot of personal practice. So for me, that's the bebop heads I've been practicing, and so Donna Lee, Scrapple, trying to get into the solos too. I've got the Charlie Parker Omni book, which is like classic practice resource, and it's just good for keeping your hands and your brain straight. And then been trying to do transcriptions of solos, well, not just bass solos, guitar solos or horn solos and stuff, just as kind of a hobby, I guess, and to keep the brain sharp and stay excited about music.
That's awesome. Well, you talk about what you're doing as far as practice. I want to ask you about your education and how. Well, first, how did you get into bass guitar, and if you did play other instruments, what were they early on?
So it was bass first for me, and the story is kind of silly, but I asked my parents for a bass for Christmas one year, and I got like $100 bass and a little practice amp starter set. It was a Washburn, and the reason that I wanted to play bass was because that summer I did a musical theater camp, and for summer camp thing, I think I was like 13 or something like that, and the bass player for the band in the pit was this like emo guy who was super hot, and all the girls were all over him. And he was like a couple of years older, and I was like, I didn't put it together that he was a little bit older and good looking, and everybody thought emo was really cool at that period in time. So I didn't put it together. I thought it was the bass that made all the girls go crazy for this guy. So I was like, I want to do that. Yeah, that's it right there. And then of course I got it, and I didn't even touch it for years after that. I didn't even open the box because at that point I was like, yeah, that's too much work. And then years later, a friend in high school wanted to start a grindcore band, and he said, "You have a bass, don't you? All right, get it. I'm going to teach you how to play. Or you're going to be the bass player in my band." And that's how it actually started.
Sweet.
Yeah.
And where was this? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in the Bay Area. So all this was in the East Bay.
Right on.
Yeah. Fun place to be playing.
Yeah. Shoot. So my favorite band's from down there. So let's see. What about, so you started playing, did you play in like high school band?
No, not at all. So it was just that one band in high school, and that was junior year. So I picked it up the summer before my junior year of high school, and then just did the metal band for those 2 years.
What, like back then, what was the biggest deal for you guys? Like, was there like a school talent show, or as far as gigs?
I think the biggest thing that we did was one of these, like, I mean, it's silly to say now, but it was like one of these pay to play things where they give you 20 tickets that you have to sell to stay on the bill. And it was in the DNA Lounge in San Francisco. And it was like, there were probably 20 bands. And looking back on it, it wasn't that cool. But at the time, it was the coolest thing ever. And then you get in there and you realize, wait a minute, it's just the other bands that are the audience. But we were playing the DNA Lounge, and that was huge for us. And then just doing stuff at bars and stuff like that when you're 19, not even actually, when you're 17 and you're playing in a bar, that's a cool feeling. And you got drunk adults who think you're cool. that seems
kids
cool. And I think for me, the coolest moment was that year when my history teacher showed up at one of our shows, And it turns out he was really into death metal. I didn't know that about him, but after the show, he came up to me and he said, "I understand now why you're failing my class." I was
Aha.
like, "All right, cool. This guy gets it."
He's putting all
Um,
your work into the death metal.
yeah, exactly. So that was probably the biggest one for me, but
Yeah.
nothing too crazy. High school band.
Yeah. Ask you, so after high school and after the death metal band, did you study music in college, or what did you go set out to do in college?
So I did, it was like one of those things I think happens a lot to musicians where my parents wanted me to go to college and I didn't really want to do much of anything. And so I figured, well, if I got to be here, I'm going to do music. That seems cool. And I went to first Diablo Valley College, which is a community college in the East Bay that had a pretty great music program, actually. And at that point, I'd been taking lessons from a guy in high school for a couple of years who had set me up, I think, pretty well with a good foundation of just theory and ear training and just good fundamental technique stuff. So I was ready to hit the ground running. And then getting to that school, it was it was like I took 21 units the first semester of just all the ensembles possible. I wanted to play, and of course you're doing theory and and music history, uh the ethnomusicology stuff, is everything music I was ready to do, and everything else I was not interested in at all. And there was a class there that was it was focused. It was like an after hours class that went from 7 to 10 or 11 or something like that at night, where the focus was forming working bands. So it was like you're just making cover bands and you're doing classics, like you're doing Motown, you're doing Long Tall Sally and stuff like that. And then the teacher would go out and get gigs for the bands that actually sounded good. So that turned into being in 10 bands at once that were
Oh,
out there doing the cover band thing, which drilled the like, how do you go and learn an hour set, and figure stuff out when there's no tabs for it and stuff like that. And then during the day, jazz band and stuff like that, combos.
nice.
Yeah. And
So,
then, oh, go ahead.
yeah, I was going to ask, so it sounds like 1 or 2 years there, right?
Yeah, 2 years of that. That was pretty intensive before I came up here to Humboldt and went to HSU for the last 2 years of the bachelor in music, which I think was a lot less intensive um, of a program, which is odd. You don't expect to transfer and have things get easier, but um, Diablo Valley College happened to just have a pretty strong program, I think. And then here was just doing the jazz band thing. I wasn't good enough at the other school to get into the big band. And there's three horn players or however many, depending on how big the band is for each horn, but there's only one bass player. But then up here, I got in my first semester here, and once you're in, you're in. You're the guy until you graduate.
Nice.
So that was a great opportunity to just practice reading the charts a little bit more. Small combos playing, like memorize the song, and that's it. There's not as much focus on arrangement.
And
Um,
you were playing upright?
yeah, yeah,
Did you start playing upright at Diablo too?
yeah.
Okay.
That, and part of that is most colleges, with the exceptions of schools like Berkeley, um, and maybe like North Texas, the big contemporary music schools. But most schools you can really only get private instruction on upright still. And up here at Humboldt, they only have a classical program. So there are jazz bands, but there's not a teacher doing jazz. There's nobody teaching electric bass or anything like that. So you kind of get forced into it, but it's awesome. I'm
Yeah.
really glad about that. Um, I don't get a ton of calls to play upright, but I have my bass, and I will answer any call to play an upright gig.
There you go.
Yeah,
Cool.
just putting it
Uh,
out there to the world.
yeah, yeah. Or will you travel?
Yeah, if,
Yeah,
hey, if I can get it paid for, I will travel. That's
there
for
you go.
sure.
Yeah, I saw you playing upright at the community center, and it was a really good show, man.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
When was?
it was a benefit for the
Yeah, for
Union
or for
Pacific
Pacific
schools. Yeah,
Union School. Yeah,
Pacific
um,
Union.
yeah. I'm actually
And
also a teacher there.
oh,
Um,
sweet.
Yeah, not music related, just the day job.
Ah, I see.
Um, yeah, that was a fun gig. Nick Talvola put that band together. Your guy Mike was the drummer. Yeah,
Classic.
yeah, hilarious dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, good hang.
Um, okay, back to business here. So
Yeah,
you were studying on upright, but you were playing plenty of electric bass. Did you find a good gig like with a good band up here when you were going to Humboldt State University?
yeah. My first band up here was called Farmhouse Odyssey, which it's like a progressive rock, psychedelic fusion, whatever you want to call it, uh, group uh, that really kind of pushed me creatively more than anything else I'd done. And it was all the dudes that were in my first jazz combo when I got here. So we met at the audition for combos, and then it was a thing where they had been all playing together for a while, and they had some really cool material. They didn't have a bass player and hadn't found somebody who they thought would be able to hang with all the odd time stuff. Um, and then just fortuitously, we got put into the same jazz small group together. And maybe 3 weeks into it, they approached me after a rehearsal and said, "So, do you like playing with us? Would you want to maybe do it more, do some other music together?" And we haven't looked back. We've got 3 albums now. The most recent one came out in 2019. There's more material hiding somewhere. So you can check that out if you're interested. Anywhere music is streamed,
Oh,
Farmhouse
cool.
Odyssey.
Nice. Perfect.
Yeah, and that's actually how I ended up meeting the dudes from Object Heavy, through that. And there was a jam scene for a while at the Jambalaya called the Get Down,
Uh,
which was hosted by Swizz, Object Heavy's keyboard player.
oh,
And
cool.
yeah, the goal there was, they wanted to connect local musicians, and it was like a pretty wide open kind of funk jam. And so they put the word out trying to figure out who are the young dudes in town who could play. And so that was our band and a handful of other bands, the Dig and Dirt guys, and there was a band called Liquid Cactus at the time. I think we were all kind of the early 20s crowd, and then there were these guys who were older, 30s and 40s, who'd been around for a while, all intermingling, and that turned into Object Heavy after a while of trading members around in different bands.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
Um, okay. Uh, I do want to mention that I was talking to you earlier that would that have been around the same time period where you actually were the backing band for Charlie Tuna when he played the Warehouse Party?
Um, that would be around that time. That party, I think, would have been maybe just a couple of years later
Okay.
than that formative period. Because I'm thinking that at that point, the band that would become Object Heavy was playing gigs with a different bass player. And after I graduated from HSU, I spent about 2 years living in LA, and then started getting calls to come up and do sub stuff
Oh,
for
cool.
Object Heavy. One such gig was the Charlie Tuna thing,
Unbelievable.
which, yeah, you're like, okay, yeah, I think I will come join your band, because if this is the kind of stuff you're doing,
Yeah.
sign me up.
Yeah. So for the audience, Charlie Tuna is one of the founding members of Jurassic 5. Just incredible hip hop group. Started, I think, around the 2000, early 2000s, maybe late 90s.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly when it started, but
But
classic.
just the best stuff. And that guy is just a monster. Flows like no other. And when you hear his voice, you're just mesmerized.
I'm from the city where they buried Al Capone and house music was born. Robert Kelly performed and heavy styles were shown. I made Hydra and settled miles from home. Coast to coast, LA from Chicago. With the apostles spitting this gritty gospel. The ghetto diplomat, apocalyptic rap. I'm gifted, come to grips with that fact.
So you played bass
Yeah.
behind him with the Object Heavy crew.
Yep.
And I
we've done
was
that.
there. I was at that show, and I did not know that. That's so awesome.
Yeah, small world or small town moment
Yeah.
right there. And we've since done a few shows with Charlie Tuna, and dude's amazing. I mean, great guy. as well as being such a talent. And then coincidentally, his usual bass player, he has a band called House of Vibe that backs him. His usual bass player is Corey Cofield, who was a customer, actually one of my favorite dudes at the bass store that I was working at when I was in LA. So one of the days that we played with him and his band, with Charlie Tuna and his band, was like, hold on, wait a minute, that's Mr. Corey Cofield right there. And that's what the boss of the store would always say, Mr. Corey, when he'd come in. I was like, hey, Mr. Corey.
Yeah.
A small world out there in the music scene.
That's cool. Yeah, especially when you're in the mix like you are. Did you have a good gig in LA when you were living down there?
Yeah, it was cool. I worked at a place called the Amp Shop and Bass Exchange in North Hollywood, which shameless plug there. They're still going. They've got one of the best instrument techs, I think, in the whole, Southern California area. And I got a chance to play with a lot of really cool gear, really cool basses, amps, and pedals. They have like the best boutique pedal selection. And they do guitar stuff as well, and a chance to meet a lot of really cool people. Thundercat came in a couple of times. We sold his childhood bass. It was a Dean Razorback. So we sold that on consignment at one point for him. And then Corey, Joe Bonamassa gets his setups done there sometimes. Just like seeing these people come in and being like, what? But yeah, you're here and I'm here and we're talking and it's normal. That's bizarre. One of our regulars went on to become the bass player for Panic at the Disco. I haven't seen her since. Nicole Rowe, she's a beast. Look her up. Absolute monster. A lot of really cool people and just like I said, cool gear.
Yeah, I bet. We got to talk about gear, man. So and then we'll get to where you are with Object Heavy from when you started to this weekend. And this weekend is we're in May 29th, 2021 for those that are watching this later on. And
it's a time capsule. Man.
Yeah, that's the beauty of YouTube. So let's talk, man. Let's talk your first bass, your favorite bass. What are you playing now? The whole deal.
Okay, we'll start at the beginning. First bass was an absolute piece of crap. I shouldn't say that, but it was a Washburn that was I think I said this earlier, $100 with the bass and the little practice amp together and a cable. So that, I think it was like a P style, P pickup, but it definitely sounded kind of awful. But it had 24 frets, which I'm stoked I had then, because there are certain things, like when I discovered Victor Wooten, and I was like, well, I want to play some of this stuff, and it's all 24 frets. So I'm happy I had that when I did. I pretty quickly, actually, here, since I'm in this room, I pretty quickly, because I was playing metal, and I realized I needed the extended range. So I went to Guitar Center and I bought this Ibanez 6-string, which I still have. It's a Sound Gear, which is kind of like a budget model. If I can, well, I don't have good lighting in here, but it's like Bubinga and Wenge for the neck. So it's like fancy-ish woods. And I just needed an active bass that had a low B string. And then I was like, well, 5 strings, if 5 strings are cool, why not go for 6?
Yeah.
Not really thinking too much about it at the time. And although I don't really do it much with Object Heavy these days anymore, this was the touring bass for a long time. It's the bass I've recorded most music that I've recorded with at this point. And it's like, I'd say it's still my favorite. It's kind of the one that, even though I have another Carvin 6-string that is overall a nicer instrument, this is the one that I learned to really play on. Once I got this was when I really took off, and that was maybe like 6 months in. And the bass that made me want to explore things like chords and extended technique, tapping and just do more with the instrument than just pluck away, I guess.
Yeah.
And you can see, looking closely at it, how played it is, because all the places where my thumb goes, the wood is worn out.
Yeah, so, you really dig in there with your fingers. Now I see like in between the strings.
I know. I don't actually, that's probably from the metal days of
I was gonna say,
going crazy. Yeah, I try not to do that anymore. I prefer to use a Willis ramp For those who aren't familiar, it's like a piece of, I use cardboard because I'm cheap, but you can get a piece of wood that goes in between the pickups that's radiused along with the, along with the neck radius. And then the idea is it keeps the feel of playing right on the pickup, and it keeps your fingers from going too low. So it allows you to play with a really light touch and kind of keep your technique under control. So for those trying to get your speed up, highly recommend checking out some people call them fret ramps, but Gary Willis, the Tribal Tech guy, came up with the idea. So the Willis ramp is what I know it as.
Yeah.
I have those on a few of my basses because it really makes a huge difference. And if you're doing like thumb stuff at all and you want to get away from doing it right over the frets and get a softer sound, it's like imperative, because otherwise your thumb is just flying too far. It's really hard to keep control. So it opens up a lot of doors technique wise. But yeah, I've logged a ton of hours on this bass. I did a tour for about a month with a band called Paco's By All Means Band. They're an Afrobeat group in Colorado, where this was the bass that I was playing the entire time. And this is an aside, but my best gear story probably. Throughout the tour, this has an active EQ on it, and the knob that controls the highs was scratchy at first, and then it somehow developed about halfway through to this point where if I didn't have it turned all the way down, no sound would come through at all. So I was just like, okay, no high end, I can live with that. Like, I don't love a sizzling high end unless I'm slapping anyway. So I was like, okay, I can deal with this. This is fine. Did the whole tour that way. But even if I like experimented and just turned it up a little bit, it'd be all volume cuts out. So then when I got back home here, I took it to Mark Siemens, he does amp repair up in McKinleyville.
Yeah.
So shout out to the local guy.
Yeah.
And just said, hey, can you take a look at this? I told him what was happening. And then he called me about it a day later. And he said, so you said that when you turn this knob down, the no sound comes through the instrument at all, but otherwise it was working? I go, yeah, that's about right. That's what's going on. Why? He says, well, I've got it open right now and none of the wires are connected inside at all. It shouldn't have made any noise at all. It's like a miracle that you were able to play this thing. And yeah, I just thought that was hilarious. It's like, I don't know if it got worse on my flight back or if it was just this bass that I've had for, the entire time, just refusing to crap out on me until I didn't need it anymore.
Oh, that's awesome. Wow.
Yeah. Magic or something.
Yeah.
Or just high quality Ibanez engineering.
Yeah. So any 4-string right now in your arsenal? Quiver?
Yeah. So I will forever and always be in my heart a P bass guy, but for some reason I'm a little bit cursed when it comes to P basses. So I had a P bass when I had just started playing. Shortly after I got this one, I got just like a candy apple red basic Mexican P. And then for some reason I sold it to some other dude for $100. It was like one of my sister's friends who wanted to start playing, and then immediately regretted it and thought, well, wait a minute, that was the best one. I didn't quite understand why at the time. I didn't really have the love of, well, I didn't have the education in terms of the history of the music and understanding why literally everybody records with a P bass at that point. So I just let it go. And then I didn't get another one until the bass I bought from you when I moved up here.
Yeah.
Which was a dream come true. You gave me a really good deal on an American Deluxe. And that was like my number one when I didn't have the need for the 6-string. Certain things you have to have the extended range for, but for everything else, that was it for me. Especially once I put Tomastic Infeld flats on it, which is my go-to.
I was going to ask if you had flats on it.
Yeah, once I put those on, those are crazy because they're fairly light and kind of exceptionally mid-rangey flats on the scale of thing. Like the classic Labella thing is more of a thumpy, really big bottom thing. And sure, of course, it's a bass. You're going to have big bottom regardless. But those Tomastics are pretty exceptionally mid-rangey and really easy to play on. I got them because I read that's what Pino Palladino used on Voodoo. I don't know if that's true, but I read it. And yeah. I loved them. I mean, I had them on that bass for about 8 years. And then the bass got stolen, unfortunately. And even with that bass, it was like, first I was not sure about it because I didn't have the flats. Then I got the strings on there. It became my number one. Then my girlfriend accidentally hit the ceiling in a green room with it one night and broke off one of the tuning pegs. She was trying to hold it for me and she broke a tuning peg. Not her fault. Accidents happen. But so it was out of commission for a while, and I finally replaced the tuning peg, that one, got it all in good working order and set it up again. And then a lighting guy broke a different tuning peg off of it, hitting it with a light, trying to set up at a show. And same thing, out of commission for a while, ordered another tuning peg, got that on it. Then it started having these odd electronic problems. I mean, like, I'm cursed. You know, my favorite instrument, and I just couldn't play it half the time. Then right after I got it fixed and got the electronics figured out, it gets stolen. And I haven't seen it since. So now, all those troubles aside, I loved that bass so much. You can see there's a couple recordings. If the old Object Heavy material ever comes out again, that's all that bass.
Oh, sweet.
I've got a couple old videos on Instagram that I'll never delete despite their poor quality because I played that bass and it's nostalgic. Man. But now I just bought, for a budget thing after that got stolen, I bought a Kramer from the early 80s. That's a PJ. So it's a knockoff P, but it was like a student model that they did in 81 or 82. Which has become the bass you're most likely, it's either going to be that or my my Jazz. I have a Fender Jazz that I've had since 2012. So the Jazz is not actually my favorite voice, you know, my favorite sound for a bass. They're awesome. Obviously the bridge pickup thing to get the Jocko sound, and it can sound just enormous. But it does the scooped mids thing, which is not my go-to preference for a bass sound. It's the opposite of what a P bass is really good for, which is really strong low mid presence. So I will mostly be seen either using the Jazz or using the Kramer. And like I said, even though Jazz isn't my go-to voice, it is the nicest quality instrument that I own, and I have I've upgraded it with a set of Peter Florence pickups that were designed. Peter got the pickups from Jocko's Bass of Doom, the famous fretless, and he got to unwind them and rewind them. So he was able to kind of reverse engineer them. And I have his Jocko clone pickups in the Jazz bass.
Gotcha. Yeah, not the actual you had the ones.
No. But he did kind of a limited run where he unwound them and reverse engineered them and got all the period correct parts. And so he has his Jocko clone pickup. They're interestingly, the pickups in his bass were remarkably hot. They were, I think the bridge is like almost 12K, which is exceptionally hot for a jazz bass, even though a bridge should be kind of hotter. You usually see them like 8 or 9K for reference, for the gear nerds out there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, dude, it's getting technical right now.
Yeah, I could be wrong. If I'm wrong about the typical resistance of a jazz bass pickup, let me know in the comments.
Yeah, you'll see them.
Yeah. I welcome education, you know, when it comes to that. But yeah, I geek out on that. Working at the guitar shop, you know, you do the deep dive pretty frequently. Because people expect you to be able to answer those questions to the best of your ability. So yeah, as far as 4 strings, it's like you got to have a P and a J. I think to cover most of your studio applications. I dream of one day having a Fender again, a Fender P, but we'll see.
Well, most of the time I have two precision basses. I only have one right now. The other, Mike's actually fixing the other one. But if you really needed to borrow one, you could hit me up, man.
I'll remember that when it's time to record.
Unfortunately, not right now because I need it.
That's all right. I mean, the great thing about the Kramer, it was $200. I got it at 2 Street Music, and I think I just traded in a couple old pedals for it. So I basically didn't pay any money for it. And so it's a perfect road instrument. You know, it's like, okay, whatever, I dropped it. It gets mishandled by TSA or something like that. Like, who cares? You know? it's nothing. It's actually awesome though. It has the a really sweet neck. It's like a big block of maple, but you don't really, you have to pay a lot for that on a modern instrument now.
Do
It's
you
a
have?
solid sound.
Yeah. Do you have Tomastics on that too?
No, actually, they're the flats that Roto Sound does, which I was just trying something new.
Yeah.
But with flats, I'm like, I'm not gonna change them. That defeats the purpose. And they're working out great for me.
Yeah.
And then I've got well, I have a Franken bass that's also a P style that I've just kind of bolted together from random parts. There's a neck that I got at the swap meet. Yeah.
It took me a minute to figure out what you meant.
What
there.
that means.
Yeah. It's like, oh yeah,
and-
Franken bass.
But that one, I've got labellas on just because I wanted one bass that had that particular, the Jamerson thing going for it. It's interesting. I'm always afraid it's going to fall apart, literally, like that the neck's going to snap off or something at some point, because it's definitely a little janky. But it's a lovable one. It was a bass that, I don't know if this is true, but the friend who gave it to me told me that his dad got it as a gift when he was a roadie for the Dixie Chicks. So it was previously owned by the Dixie Chicks bass player. And then when I was in college, I ripped the frets out of it and did that thing. Ripped the frets out, filled it in with wood putty, and then put epoxy over the fingerboard and kind of did the Jocko thing.
Jocko thing, yeah.
But it didn't sound like that. Being one, a P bass, and two, it was a Hammer Slammer, I think, or Hamer brand. It's a very like off-brand. So I'm skeptical of the Dixie Chicks story, to be honest, because I don't know why they'd be playing such a weird off-brand instrument unless they bought that at like Guitar Center to give to their roadie. But
yeah, parting gift
so
or something.
It sounded muddy and strange. So I glued the guts of an old overdrive pedal onto it, thinking that might be cool, and hardwired the pedal into the volume knob, like in between the volume and the output of the bass, because this particular overdrive just made it sound like a giant 808. It was such a muddy bass and muddy overdrive. So for a while I was using it to play like dubstep and trap grooves at house parties. I had a friend with a drum machine, and we would go do just drum machine and bass, and I would just crank my amp all the way up and try to shake the foundations, pretending to be an 808.
Wow.
And then that neck failed miserably on me after a while. It started getting really warped. So got a new neck at a swap meet. And, anyway, that's fun gear stories.
That's cool. Well, if you're ready to move on to amps, what are you playing? Well, let's just say what's your favorite rig, Ben, and what are you playing with Object Heavy on Saturday? Or what do you usually? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So favorite, tough call. So favorite rig would be maybe a tie. I think my favorite rig is actually probably what I have now, which I'll say that this is what I'll be playing anytime that you see me with Object Heavy, is an SVT Classic head. So 300 watt, tube monster that weighs 80 pounds.
Yeah.
But it was my dream rig, and I finally got one a few years ago. Like, never looked back. It sounds absolutely amazing.
Oh, I can't wait to hear this.
And then I play it through my old Mark bass cab. Before that, I had a Mark bass, full solid state head, and a 410. That's been like my forever rig since I was in high school. I saved up all my money working at a movie theater to buy it.
Right.
In 2008, I guess, right when I started playing. And I still have that cab, but I don't particularly, sorry, Mark bass, I don't particularly love the bright yellow color scheme that they have going on. So I have this tapestry covering it up, which adds this air of mystery. And I love, like, sometimes sound guys will come up and go, man, your rig sounded really good. What, like, is that an Ampeg speaker back there, or what's the deal? No, it's an old Mark bass. It was kind of ugly, so I put the tapestry over it, and they always think it's something special back there, which I like.
Well, it's an SVT, right?
Well, yeah, the SVT that makes it sound amazing. And I do think when I have plugged in or played like on a festival stage with a backline, it's usually the same head, but with an Ampeg 810. And I know that's the thing for a lot of people, but whenever I've played through Ampeg cabs, I've found that there's a certain kind of like stiff high end that they have that just like doesn't work with my playing style particularly well. It gets really clanky on me. Um, or like maybe brittle would be the word to use. Whereas the Mark bass is like the opposite completely. You know, the highs kind of get rounded off and is more of a mid-range focused sound that I think that they go for, which some people absolutely hate. But for me, it rounds out the tone really effectively, and you can still get pretty good snappy high end. But I think there's a difference between snappy and brittle, I guess. Or you know, having some sizzle can be nice when you're slapping, or you want to do like the metal thing where you have a lot of attack in your tone. But um, it's hard to put into words. Tone is hard to put into words, but there's a
Well,
give.
you're doing something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a certain kind of give. Like when I hit the thing harder, it responds not by pushing back up against me, but by kind of like bending a little bit with what you're doing or something like that. It's like I said, hard to put into words, but I appreciate that from the Mark bass rig.
And that's the 410 cabinet?
Yeah.
And you've been using that for this long, since 2008?
Yeah.
Oh,
the
good
only
deal.
cab I've ever had. Yeah. So
So
hey,
you never messed with a 15?
so for a while I did like 2 tours with Object Heavy where I was using an Ampeg 15 that I borrowed from a dude in town for no reason other than to try it. And I will say I loved that cab too. That was a pretty sweet sound. I just find that for the most part, I don't need that amount of low end on stage. Especially most of the gigs we play, it won't be the case this weekend, but most of the gigs we play, there's a full system. So it's like there's a sub, you know,
Yeah.
or multiple subs in the room. So I'm not the one providing that really low range. Really, it's coming from the sound system. And on stage, I just need to be able to feel it and really hear the notes that I'm playing, like the note definition, which is all low mids pretty much. So the tens have that clarity on
Yeah.
stage. It's really nice. They're really punchy.
Yeah.
So you know, you cut through without it being this overwhelming, like you're eating the kick drum alive kind of thing.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
I used to play through 410s back in the day, and now I've been playing with through a 15 for the last couple of years, and
Yeah.
I'm starting to think that 410s is probably the way to go.
I
Just
think,
because of that reason. I mean, I'm not playing
Yeah.
like, you know, gigs like you are where there's full sound system, but maybe one day.
Yeah, well, I think the dream when you're either on like the giant stage where it doesn't matter anymore and you just get to do your ideal thing, or if you're providing all of the sound, if there's not a system, right? Then I think the dream rig is like a 410 on top of a 15 or a 210 on top of a 15 for a more modest, rational setup. But I think like to circle back to kind of like favorite rigs, there's a dude named Larry. He runs the Talent Club in Talent, Oregon, which is a really frequent stop for a lot of pretty sick bands. It's not a big town. It's kind of near Ashland, but it's a great tour stop between, say, like the Bay Area and same way Arcata kind of is, and Portland or Eugene. So it's in between, like smack in between bigger cities, and they pay a good guarantee. And the sound guy is a bass player, and he has an Eden rig. So it's an Eden World Tour, or I think that's what they're called, World Tour. It's an older Eden like hybrid tube preamp, solid state power section, Eden rig, which you know, Edens are awesome. I've always been a fan of that sound. And he's got matching 15 and 410 with it, and he runs them in series. It just sounds huge. So every time we go there, I pull out his rig because he has it in the back, and he lets me play through that. And it's just awesome, like so much power and clean punch. I'm like, I don't even care if this is overkill for this room. I love playing through that rig.
Yeah.
So shout out to Larry and the Dream bass rig.
The Eden, yeah.
Yeah, it's heavy though. One of those cabs weighs almost what my entire rig weighs.
Oh, jeez. So I guess lastly, I want to talk to you about, you know, you talked about how you met the guys at Object Heavy at the jam.
Mm-hmm.
When you started with Object Heavy, you know, how did that go, and like the pace, and did you guys like, what was your first tour, and then, you know, leading up to to this weekend, and we don't have to talk about the pandemic. I mean, it's
Right. Yeah. We all know what the pandemic
we all
was.
know what
It's
happened. Yeah,
a whole lot of nothing.
the whole year that was
Um,
erased.
yeah, and a lot of gigs. But at the time that I started really playing with Object Heavy, I was in LA working at the bass shop, and it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was the Charlie Tuna gig that they needed a sub for, and they didn't have anybody, I guess, locally who they knew and trusted to be able to learn material quickly, which is one of the things that, that I am fairly strong at, is covering covering a lot of stuff quickly, taking good notes, and being able to remember everything for long enough to do the gig, cramming. So they called and asked if I could maybe do it, and it was a gig in Santa Rosa the first time, actually. So maybe that was something else. Anyway, it was like a Canafest, I think is what it was, and then after party for that. And I went and did that and had a really good time. I came up for rehearsal for a couple days, and then went down to the gig and went back home to LA. And then that worked out, and it turned into a thing where every time they had a gig that they couldn't cancel and needed a sub for, something that was like a festival or a major, backing a bigger artist, something that was a big enough deal that they didn't want to bail on it, I was the guy. I did that 5 or 6 times, being their emergency sub. And then one day they called and asked, okay, well, are you interested in coming back up to Humboldt and being the full-time guy? And they told me that they're trying to tour more. Their other bass player left, wasn't really interested in doing that. He had a full-time job, and it worked out. There was like a confluence of interests in my life that led me to want to come back up here to record with my other band, Farmhouse Odyssey, and this opportunity came up to be with Object Heavy, and so it all seemed like the planets aligned, and I came back up and jumped right into it. And I'm trying to think what that first tour, I think we must have done like a run up to Portland, maybe Southern Washington, just like a Pacific Northwest circuit, which is our usual bread and butter. If I remember right, there was a show at the Hi-Fi, which I believe closed, but that was the spot in Eugene for funk and jam music for a long time. That stands out in my memory as being an especially good show. So I think that was the first run. And I remember hearing, all about all the members of the band that were no longer a part of it down in the green room there, and getting kind of the gossip part of it. After having played with everybody for a while, it's kind of like, oh, you're really in when you start getting the gossip,
The juice, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. People feel comfortable that you're not going anywhere, and you're not going to turn around and say anything in confidence, to somebody else. So I remember that as kind of the, oh, I guess I'm in, I guess this is really happening moment. And then, it's been 4 years minus 1 year of pandemic that have been pretty much nonstop, being on the road. We've gone as far out as Chicago with this band too.
Nice.
And typically we're doing like down to the Bay Area and up as far as Seattle. We've done a few things in Idaho, and kind of just pushing slowly further out east as we go and trying to build it. It's like it's all a bit of a blur at this point. Lots of really good times, lots of really kind of like silly parties after the show and stuff like that.
Sure.
Lots of ironing out mistakes and stuff like that on stage, and learning how to keep a show on track no matter what happens. All the stuff that comes with being on the road all the time.
Yeah.
So it's been an awesome journey that I think has really honed for me what it means to be really performing rather than just playing in front of people. Not looking at your feet or your hands the whole time, but actually dancing or jumping around and making faces, interacting with the crowd and with each other. And a lot of the professionalism of like what happens, how do you prevent crash and burn if somebody had a little too much that night, or like, now we just don't do that, obviously.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
how
yeah.
you prevent it. But
Yeah.
Or like for me, it's like, what do you do when you just accidentally unplugged your pedal board because you were jumping around too much, and now you got to scramble and get your sound back, and you just figure stuff out as you go. So it's been really awesome and a lot of growth for everybody in the band over the last few years, which leads us up to our current state of affairs, which is that we've been working for a while on a new album that, knock on wood, should be out hopefully at some point this year. We've been stalled out because of the pandemic, but we had the great fortune to record with Kelly Finnegan of the Monophonics and the Kelly Finnegan band. His band is called the Atonements, at their studio in the Bay Area, and it was a pretty amazing experience. He's a very talented producer, and his studio, it's like all vintage gear. We recorded to 8-track tape and got to go through all this rack gear stuff that you don't usually do when you're used to Pro Tools life. And that I think it's a serious upgrade. I mean, I'm more proud of the sonics of that album, the timbres and the mix, than I am of probably anything that I've been a part of to date. So I think it's going to be really good. So you want to be on the lookout for that. And we're going to be hopefully touring that and really using that as a springboard to get even farther out east. The dream is to one day tour Europe, as I'm sure it's kind of everybody's dream, right?
Sure.
But I'm very proud of it. I have a feeling once we're able to get out that first single, people are going to be pretty stoked. It's very cool. We've got our new-ish singer Richard Love sounding absolutely amazing on the whole thing, and just being able to get a little bit of the classic soul vibe through the sonic elements of it, through the recording gear. I get to play through an early 70s P bass into the Acme does the Motown DI. So it's modeled off of the DI they had at the studio in Motown. So very much a Jamerson vibe going on there for me. And I was going, okay, yeah, forget it. We don't need to use my bass. This is cool. Same story for everybody. We got to play all vintage gear into vintage gear, and it shows. You're going, oh yeah, this is why all that music sounds so good.
No doubt.
Yeah,
that's rad. Yeah, that's great. I wanted to ask you about, real quick, your influences, and then any advice you would give to aspiring musicians that are maybe just going to music school or college and considering trying to make it like yourself.
It's flattering. Maybe a lot to say that I've made it. I've still got aspirations here.
Well, that's good. But, that's good.
But you should, I guess that would be one thing, is, be aware that you might find yourself, as I have, doing stuff that teenage me thought was farther than, didn't even know that this was a place that a music career could go. You think it's either pop star or doing a tour in a ratty old band with your friends or something like that. And no matter how far you go, there's always something else in front of you that you want to reach for. So instead of being frustrated by that, because it can get frustrating, take that as an inspiration that this is a career and a path as an artist that never ends. And that's awesome. There are certain skills where it's kind of like, okay, I beat the game. What do I do next? But you can't beat this game. It's infinitely deep. So be ready for that too. Be ready to be excited about that instead of discouraged. Now that, and to aspiring musicians, I would say, don't worry too much about messing things up or sounding bad or whatever. Don't worry about doing the wrong stuff, because you are definitely going to do a bunch of wrong stuff along the way. So, somebody was saying they really wanted to get in a band. Just to this afternoon, somebody was telling me this. They really wanted to get in a band, but she didn't feel like she was good enough on her instrument to play with people. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, even if you're good on your instrument, the first time you play with people, it's still going to be really awkward, and you're not going to have that skill set. So you might as well get the embarrassing falling on your face part out of the way now, while you're also still learning your instrument, instead of spending years learning your instrument and then spending years learning how to play it with other people. Just dive in. If what you want to do is record, like, get whatever GarageBand or something and start recording yourself, because if you wait for 5 years,
use your phone, anything.
Yep, exactly. If you wait till you're good enough, then you're going to wait until you're dead. And so that would be my biggest piece of advice to aspiring musicians, is just jump in way over your head, because you'll get there. You're going to make mistakes anyway.
That's awesome.
And I guess influences, like, that's everybody's favorite conversation, right? I think the obvious ones, maybe you'll start kind of far back and then work my way up, I guess. In jazz and the world of upright playing, it's Ron Carter for sure, like number one man as far as walking and playing creatively in a jazz setting. He also has some great electric playing on, like what Red Clay, I'm pretty sure is him, the Freddie Hubbard album. It's like great jazz funk. So he's the man for sure. For a completely different reason, Ray Brown's amazing. Ron Carter's like outer space sometimes. He's so out of left field and creative. And Ray Brown's also creative, but he's like the meat and potatoes champion of just holding it down. And tone, both of those dudes, they have the sweetest tone. And then Scott LaFaro from the Bill Evans trio changed the role of the bass. I mean, there were great bass soloists prior, but he elevated the vocabulary of the bass as a soloist, and the way that the upright bass can interact in the trio setting. I think he passed away at like 24 or 25. It was a pretty tragic thing, but in the few years that he was on the scene, it's like listen to the Live at the Village Vanguard recordings for Bill Evans for some just amazing interaction with the rest of the band, and playing, like, keeping it swinging but not walking, this very modern concept. So huge inspiration there. I've got a book of transcriptions of the Bill Evans trio right here that I work out of pretty regularly.
Nice,
so that's great stuff. There's Avishai Cohen is a more modern dude. He's an Israeli upright player who's just like out of this world. His chops are absolutely insane. For chops to NHOP is worth checking out. He's like a bebop, just crazy monster. I think he's from the Netherlands. On electric, Jamerson, like the GOAT for sure. I grew up on Motown, so that's just a part of it for me. It's what music's supposed to sound like. And then he had such a free approach. He never really plays the same thing twice, and was able to get all over the instrument and get away with playing some really dissonant notes and making them sound sweet as part of those lines. And I think he's the father of the vocabulary of groove bass. And then moving forward in time, Bootsy is a huge one for me, for the use of effects and just being able to let your freak flag fly and still keep it solid and anchor the band. Definitely a Jocko fan. It's easy to go too far and be a Jocko clone, but there's a reason so many people do it. The guy just sounds good. You don't have to be playing fretless to get a lot out of learning those lines. And it's not just, of course, you listen to his version of Donna Lee for some great fingering approaches and some inspiration for playing fast. Do Portrait of Tracy to get your harmonics under control and be able to play chords with harmonics. That stuff is all amazing, but the dude's groove playing is phenomenal. That percolating 16th note thing, which calls to mind another huge influence for me, East Bay guy Rocco.
I knew you were gonna say it.
Yeah, he's a huge one for me, especially just like Tower of Power played at my dad's homecoming in high school. I'm an East Bay guy, so gotta give love there. And then Paul Jackson Jr. from the Headhunters, Herbie's funk stuff. I think he would be a top 5 for me. Huge influence. Anything like, you listen to the album Thrust, that's where it's at. Him and Mike Clark are just an amazing rhythm section together. And I liked the concept there of, Herbie said he wanted to, there were all these other dudes that were doing fusion by getting jazz musicians to play funky, and that's what Miles was doing at that time. And he wanted to get a bunch of funk musicians and get them to play jazzy instead. And you totally hear it in the sound of those records. You know, you listen to Headhunters and Thrust and like Manchild. There's a few other ones in that 70s there where it's like, yeah, this is some raw, dirty funk, and then this exploratory jazz improv thing going on with it. So I think he was onto something with that.
That's
And
cool. Yeah, Thrust is awesome.
yeah, and Paul Jackson passed away this year, which was
Yeah.
tragic, big loss. I mean, Rocco last year too.
Yeah.
We've lost some big ones. More modern dudes. I've been a huge fan of Mono Neon for almost the amount of time I've been playing bass. Like when he was just a dude on YouTube playing his own wild covers, you know, over songs before the Ghost Note thing. I was like, this guy is cool, you know, in the ski mask, and just like his art manifesto that he puts on all of his videos, such an inspiration. It's all just about kind of the same thing I was saying before. Be just going for it. Don't be afraid to fall flat on your face. Put yourself out there, warts and all, and just be creative, do art. Like, you know, that whole philosophy really gets me. And you look at a guy like that who now is one of the top bass players in the world today, and he gets to do exactly his own thing. Nobody's telling him, no, we don't want you to use the whammy pedal on stage. They're going, please come, we'll pay you whatever you want to do exactly what you want to do on stage. And I respect the hell out of that. For the same reason, I'm a huge fan of Bubby Lewis, who's a monster shredder, and similar story. A dude who's inspiring because he can play anything and could be backing anybody, but he has a really strong commitment to what makes him unique as an individual and as a player. So it's like, you go check out his social media presence and it's all Dragon Ball Z, like anime memes and stuff. He's just a big dork, like a weeb, you know, but it works for him because it's who he is. And he's one of the best bass players probably who's ever lived, as far as technique and ear. He's one of those guys who can hear something and just immediately play it on the instrument. So again, just tremendous respect for those players who lean into their individuality instead of the traditional role thing. I mean, if what you love is the traditional role, then that's you should do that, right? It's not to knock that at all. I love being just a meat and potatoes player, but I really love it when people are willing to take risks, you know, because it's what they really want to do, not because it's cool or it's what other people want them to do.
Yeah.
You know, Thundercat's another guy like that. Built up a career based on his voice and his personality on the instrument, rather than just being the best generic bass player around. And you know, just those three, Bubby and Thundercat and Mono Neon, because there's so much color in what they do. And they're all those kinds of dudes who you can tell it's them immediately, right? You know, one note. That's what they always say about Santana, right? You can tell who you're listening to by one note, or Jerry. And those guys have it. That's hard to do as a bass player.
Well, you could say that about Phil too, huh? Maybe.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Phil Lesh, that is. That's cool, man.
Yeah, Phil's one where I've learned some of his lines, especially because I was doing the Dead cover thing for a little while, but wasn't necessarily one of the guys who really like inspired me to play. I kind of came to that music later on, and you know, coming to it later on gave me more of an appreciation for like, oh yeah, this is actually some shit right here. You know, especially, so I love some of the 70s stuff, early 70s Dead, where they're really going hard. There's a fire. Also, just speaking of that scene, Oteil's a top 5 bass player for me. I knew him from his work with Aquarium Rescue Unit and the Jimmy Herring Band, which is crazy. I mean, like, some crazy playing. Talk about chops. That guy has chops to spare.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. He's a top 5 guy as well. I'm probably leaving out a bunch of great ones.
I don't want to like.
Yeah, there's a ton.
You didn't mention this guy. Oh yeah, there's a ton.
I mean, I guess if there's one other that I would have to mention for modern dudes, I do a ton of transcribing of Michael League.
Oh,
You know,
nice. Yeah.
yeah, the dude from Snarky Puppy. For those who don't know, everyone should know that if you're listening to a bass interview. But
Yeah, if you, especially if you've gotten this far.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, that dude. Just because his feel is so phenomenal. I mean, like where he places his notes against the beat and his phrasing is just excellent. So that's great. If you're trying to figure out how to sound groovy, like you could do worse than to pick up some Snarky Puppy records or any of the stuff he's on, and cop some of those lines.
I just learned that that's his band. Like he's the
Yes,
director.
it is. Yep.
That's so rad.
He does a lot of the writing for it, and yeah, that dude's busy. He stays very busy between that and lots of sideman work and running a business. You know, he stays busy.
Snarky Puppy. Yeah, what a band that is.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to talk about on this bass forum?
Is there anything else to talk about? There's probably a ton of, I can talk about bass for hours and hours. I would say one more thing to people who are just specifically playing bass. This applies on any instrument, but every student I've ever had, you should do yourself a favor. And even if you've already been playing for a while, if you haven't done this, take a couple of weeks, if you can afford to do it, forget about anything else that you might want to practice and just play the most basic, like open strings, eighth notes, and explore your technique. Like move this right hand around, see what it sounds like playing in different areas of the instrument, explore different angles with your fingers to figure out what's the most efficient thing to do and what gets you a sound that you're actually inspired by, and learn good technique that way. Just take a couple of weeks, do basic exercises, but stare at your hands and really engage your ears and figure out what sounds good and what lets you be relaxed on your instrument. Because if you do that early on, especially, that's a foundation that will allow you to play anything that gets put in front of you as you develop as a musician. Then you don't have to worry about the hands part of it anymore, and you'll get speed through that efficiency. So, have good technique and don't just do what a book said or what somebody else said. Sit down and figure out what your body is supposed to be doing as you interact with the instrument, what works for you. Because too many bass players have pretty sloppy technique,
Yeah, because everybody's hands are different. If you're trying to play like Victor, and Victor Wooten's fingers are like twice as big as anyone else's fingers, period. So, the way that he plays his bass is no one else is going to be able to do that.
Yeah, and you could do similar stuff, but you're going to have to find your way to approach that and to get to that. Same thing, Jocko had gigantic hands.
And Stanley Clark did too, yeah.
Yep. I think Victor Wooten's fingers might actually be pretty short. I think I heard him say something
but I mean,
but they're wide, right?
Wide, yeah.
And so it's like everybody's got different stuff. Just that you've got different things that are going to work for you. If you don't have the stretch to play certain things and you want to be shredding, time to start tapping, because then stretching's a non-issue, right? You get creative with your solutions that way, and figure out your muting game as far as keeping your open strings from ringing out early on. That's a big part of it, and all of that is something where get a good teacher, sure, take a Skype lesson where that's all you do. If you can afford to do that, have somebody watch you and make suggestions, but there is absolutely no substitute for conscious attention, of just being able to do alternating just on an open string, no music being made. You're just playing like the open D string or something like that with your two fingers, but lean over and stare at those two fingers so that you know exactly what your hand's actually doing, right? And then if something's going wrong, it's much easier to fix because you're just paying attention to it. It almost fixes itself. If you're like, oh, that looks awkward, then you just do something less awkward and you figure yourself out pretty quickly that way. And then the world is your oyster. Whatever music you want to do, if you ever run into a hitch in your technique and you're like, I can't play that, now you have that by directing your attention back to your technique while you try to play that, doing the exact same thing, stare at your hands and be like, oh, I can't play that because I'm leading with my middle finger and I should be leading with my first finger or something. It comes up and you just fix all the problems much more easily, and you get a sense of empowerment out of that. So do that. That's my parting message. Pay attention to what you're doing.
That's great advice.
Yeah, it takes you far.
Yeah. Cool, Ian. Well, thanks a
Yeah.
lot for hanging out, man. I can't wait to see Object Heavy this weekend. And
Yeah, it's gonna be
you know,
fun.
I'll leave links and links to your band and your information at the credits here.
Sweet. Awesome.
Okay. Thanks, man.